Hello there and welcome to the Secrets of Organ Playing podcast. I'm your host, Vidas Pinkevičius. Welcome to Secrets of Organ Playing podcast 112. Today is Sunday, September 17, 2017, and today's guest is an American organist, Robert Morehead. Robert is a native of Pittsburgh and is the director of music ministries at Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Vienna, Virginia. He began his organ studies at the age of 12 in Germany under the instruction of Tassilo Schlenther. For 20 years, Robert has held director of music positions in German Lutheran, Presbyterian, Episcopal, and Evangelical Lutheran churches. Robert holds a Bachelor of Music degree in organ performance from Malone University in Canton, Ohio. And while at Malone, he received instruction from W. Robert Morrison and also earned a piano teaching certificate. Over the years, Robert has earned 3 organ certifications: D-Schein from the Lutheran Church in Germany, the service playing certificate from the AGO, and the Collegaue certification from the AGO. In 2007, Robert received his master's degree in music history from West Chester University of Pennsylvania, where he also earned a research award from the university for his work on the topics of Ralph Vaughan Williams's agnosticism. Robert's thesis was based on the jazz organ music of Dr. Joe Utterback of Rowayton, Connecticut. He also has played harpsichord and sung for the Renaissance and early music ensemble Collegium Musicum at West Chester. In his free time, Robert is a freelance recitalist and composer performing throughout the United States and Germany. In this conversation, Robert shares his ideas about his organ practice, about his challenges that he has to overcome daily, about his music ministry, and you will learn about coordination between hands and feet, fingering, hymn playing, and challenging your listeners when you work as a liturgical musician. I hope you will find this conversation inspiring. Let's go to the show. So, Robert, I'm so delighted that you are connecting with me across the globe, right, on different time zones. We are so many miles apart, thousands of miles apart, but probably we share one common goal, one common vision. This is a pipe organ playing, right?
So yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Robert, and I will be very eager to know about your organ playing procedures, your challenges, what you're currently working on. Those things will be very delightful to know for our audience around the world. Thank you so much. You're very generous.
No, thank you. I'm happy to be part of it.
So, Robert, do you remember the time when somebody introduced you the pipe organ when you were young, and not that you are old, but little, I would say, in your early days? Do you remember when you first fell in love with the organ?
I can actually remember that really vividly. It was, I went to a church service with my parents in the Pittsburgh area, and I was enthralled by the postlude. So I just walked up and I watched the organist playing the postlude, and ever since then I was sold. I was ready to start studying, but it took me a while to get studying. I didn't study right away. That was the first impression I think that was made. And it's interesting because I played a lot of different organs over the years, and it's a very small Schlicker organ. So it had nothing really. It is a nice instrument, but you would think sometimes it takes this large instrument to convince. It wasn't that. It was a small instrument. It had a simple beauty, and I was just enthralled by watching the organist playing the postlude.
Mm-hmm. And of course, a lot of organists play only hymns, and not everybody plays, extended toccatas for postludes and preludes in the beginning of service. So you were kind of lucky, probably, to experience this original organ music, right? Right from the beginning.
I would say so. It was a small church, so I'm actually happy that I had that opportunity, and that most churches are good about this, but they allowed me to go up and watch them play. And I mean, I'm the same way. If someone wants to watch me play, come up and watch after the postlude. Sometimes I put an invitation in the bulletin, just encourage people.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So, how old were you then when this happened for the first time?
Well, I can only make a guess. I would say 7 or 8. I mean, I actually started study when I was living in Germany, but before that is when it actually was kindled or awakened the joy of playing the organ. So I would say anywhere between 7 and 9. How's that?
That's a very formative year. A lot of young people are very curious at this age, right? And whatever comes into our horizon, maybe will come out later in life with some fruitful collaboration and creativity too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in fact, from the what I did at that point was when I was 8, so I think it's probably closer to 7, is I started just playing out of keyboard books myself, playing chords. So just learning the harmonies, and it sounds boring, but I had a lot of fun with it, just playing C chord, A minor 7. And so today it's really easy for me to hear harmonies because I spent all that time. So that was how I started, actually. Right after that, I just started playing on a keyboard.
There is a famous, I think, Austrian novel about the brother of sleep, about an organist. It's a fiction novel about maybe it was like 19th century story or early 20th century story about a village organist who was actually not an organist, but discovered the pipe organ inside of the village church. Nobody taught him about the instrument, how it sounds, how it functions, but he was so curious, just as he started playing, fooling around with chords and improvising and even tuning this instrument at night. And later on, he participated in a town, in a big city for a professional organ competition, and it was not successful at first, but later in life he didn't give up, and it was sort of a success story. So it reminds me how you first also try to improvise those chords on your own, right? Just using your ears.
Yeah, and just using what I had. I mean, that's the interesting part. When I look back, I think my parents had a Magnus chord organ, which is its own little device in itself. And on that chord organ, you can actually push the chords. But I decided that I didn't want to do that. And I thought that was a good decision now in hindsight, because then I started learning the chords and how they were put together. So that really helped me, I think, later in life with improvisation. So I did take some steps right away, even though I didn't officially have lessons yet. But thank God that happened eventually.
So what was about that postlude that captivated your attention? Maybe, was it a toccata? Do you remember anything about it right now? Or was it like a
It's a long time ago. I would say what my best memory was, I probably think of maybe 3 things. One was it was loud. I liked that. There was a power to it. The other thing was it was busy. There was a lot going on. There was just so much there to listen to, and it wasn't enough to do in one hearing. And I guess the third thing was watching the organist, all the collaboration and techniques that she had to use to play it. So I think those are the 3 things that stick out to me. of course, the coordination too.
Cool. Of course, virtuoso playing very fast, very loud at the end of the service is always very impressive, especially if an organist uses feet, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So, what happened later, Robert? How did you decide to study the organ, seriously, and it will be, like enter a professional career as an organist?
Mm-hmm. Well, it took some time, actually. What happened with my family is my dad's job moved to Germany. So all of a sudden we were just moving to Germany after that interest was awakened, I guess I could say, for the organ. And I just kept kindly nagging my parents that I would like to play. And I do thank my grandparents because they actually provided the money so I could take lessons. But what happened first was I had to take piano. So in Germany, I couldn't actually do organ first. They wouldn't let me, which in hindsight, again, is a good thing because you do need that piano technique. And I remember, so I had to take a few years of lessons first just to learn basic piano. And then after a while, I think it was 2 or 3 years, I went to a conservatory in Geisenheim and I tried to play something for a teacher. And believe it or not, it was from the Kleine Präludium-Fugen from Bach. I don't think it was the first one in C. I think it was the fourth one in F. And I played it for him, and he had a spinet organ in his office. And I remember him saying, I can't teach you. So he pointed me to another organist, local organist in Geisenheim, Tassilo Schlenther, and he began teaching me. And so I was very excited because at that point I could finally play the organ. Now, my dad was actually leading prayer in the Anglican Church in Wiesbaden, and occasionally I would bring a keyboard with me to play for the services. So I already started service playing in a way sort of informally. I'm not going to say I was playing great, but I actually was playing single notes and just for leadership purposes. But it really got me started in getting used to how to play for service, how to respond in situations, things like that. So that's pretty much how it started. And then Tassilo Schlenther, after I started with him, what I was really disappointed about, he started me in the Keller method, which a lot of students don't start in this country at least. But what I realized was that he said, well, I got a few pages in, you have to go back to the piano. So I had to go back to the piano for 6 months. And that was a very hard decision for me because you're young and you don't always have that patience. But I decided I'm going to stick it out. So just remember all the hours in his studio apartment playing on the piano, and he just had me do scales and arpeggios. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, when is this going to end? So one of my great memories of that was I saw a piece on his piano by Billy Joel, and I said, can I please play this? I've been doing scales and arpeggios for like 4 months. And he said, okay, I could let you do that. And so Billy Joel has this like very emotional significance for me in my life because of that. But when I went back to the organ after that, it was amazing how much easier it was to play and having that technique as a backing. So I've carried that with me even till today, that I still practice with technique. I'm still going to warm up when I practice during the week or daily. Even though, I may know the scales, I still do it anyway, just so that I have that backing that I can fall back to.
Mm-hmm.
So
when you first started playing the organ, do you remember what was your goal back then? What was your dream?
Oh, that's a good question. I think to play. I mean, I know that sounds so simple, but just to play. And I can remember my first two pieces so vividly because of that. The one was in the Kleine Präludium Fugen. It was the second one in D minor. And I remember working on that over and over again. But just to play was, and to play on these historical organs in Germany added so much to the experience. There was a certain aura that you felt in the space, and it was just very special. And I really just wanted to play. Now, the organist that was teaching me, Tassilo, he actually did he basically taught me like he would teach any other organist, which I thought was great. So it was a little different because the hymn playing in Germany is slightly different than the United States, where I had to go copy the hymns if the church had a hymnal with all the parts. Generally, they just had melody line. So it was make up your parts. You just had to make it up. So this is where the chords came in very handy that I learned years ago. But also he taught me basic figured bass rules, things like that I learned right at the beginning. So he included hymn playing right away. So it's, I don't know. It's a hard thing to think about.
What was your biggest challenge back then as an organist? What was the most frustrating part for you?
Coordination. Absolutely coordination. And we have it more today, I notice in my teaching too with students, is that there's just no sense of, I'm not going to say no sense, because there are always students that have it. But it's becoming less common that we have patience. You know, we have everything on the phone. We have everything so available to us. So that makes it more challenging, I think. So what was the question again? It was...
So, you mentioned that coordination, right? Between...
Yes, coordination. That reminds me of the second piece he had me play, and it was because I really wanted to play it after he gave it to me. It was the prelude from Prelude Fugue Variation by Franck, and that's a hard piece to do as your second piece, the prelude. Because the timing of the pedal, and I remember working on that for months on end, but I really wanted to do that because I wanted to have that coordination and understanding of how to balance when I'm pedaling, how to shift my hands from manual to manual. That was, I think the determination there just carried me through because I wanted to be coordinated. So that was the biggest challenge. I didn't have so much fear about the pedals. I think I was more excited about them. So that helped. And of course he had me hymn playing. And when you're hymn playing, when you don't see the rest of the parts, you begin to trust your feet after a while, because if you hit a wrong note, you can always fix it, basically, because there's no accompaniment there.
Right. So when you were playing Franck's Prelude, Fugue and Variation, was the prelude for you more difficult than the variation, or vice versa? Or maybe left-hand passages in the variation were more frustrating?
Well, I only learned the prelude first with Tassilo. That was like, so the complicated thing there was the timing. It was the rests and the pedal and those leaps. That's what I remember. Now, I did actually finish the piece in college later. I would say some spots in the variation, some of the fingerings, that's probably the part I was challenged with the most. Because it moves, I think more like water a bit towards the end. It's a beautiful piece, but it's just making sure, keeping my hand relaxed so it can be agile to really finger well. So I think that was the major challenge.
So what about fingering that were so difficult for you to did you write down the fingering in this spot, or you made it up on the occasion as improvisation?
Well, I think at first I made it up, just like most people do. I think I've learned over the years different ways of making it work. I think writing in can be very helpful. Absolutely. Because then you know what it is. But I think that for me, I also need some other methods to make sure that I have other safeguards. So one is I also think of shape. I think of shape as well. So what, and it can be anything. I try to be creative about it. Sometimes it's an animal or food, or I try to have fun with it. The other way is tactical. So, and I would just play it through, just to get the feeling of it. And I know you recommend that in your suggestions too. And I agree. I mean, I remember playing on tables. I do that a lot. I did that a lot at school too. And it's a good way to spend time when nothing's really getting done during a class, like you're just waiting or something. You can just play through. So that tactical memory is really great. And another one that I employ is analytical. And I've used that a lot with choirs as well. If I can, and I know you've done that too. Great advice on that as well. Just analyzing it. And I think what's important as the performer is that I analyze it for myself. Like if I'm teaching it, yes, let's do the Roman numerals. Let's do everything correct. But for me, it's important, like, what do I need to know? So it's not that I analyze everything. So it might be, well, I need to know that this is a B minor first inversion followed by this. And then I remember that going back and practicing that. I don't analyze the entire thing. So I think all of that together, sort of, they all help each other. And then when one safeguard protects each one, so to say, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. It's basically systematized method. Yes, you probably not only played organ music, you played exercises, you played also harmony exercises, you improvised, you improved your music theory knowledge, and in history too, and hand and feet coordination. Everything put together resulted in a better, treatment of fingering too. Everything, I think, works there.
Well, and of course, it's as you grow through music and you learn more, you realize the fingerings have to change too. And I think that's another thing, is to not be meaning stylistically. It's different in different styles. And again, that's something that you have provided great advice on, like Baroque fingering and articulated legato, which, I mean, the fingering is going to be different there than it's going to be for romantic music.
And earlier, a little bit, we were talking about hand and feet coordination, right? What helped you to overcome this challenge in early days?
I think hymn playing, believe it or not, because there's such a faith to hymn playing, because you have to trust yourself. It took me a long time to learn that, because I wanted to memorize every part, and you can do that. But there's a point, at least for me, that was as far as I could go. Like how is it going to be different if I see a hymn now and I have to sight read it? I can't memorize every part. I have to start trusting what I'm seeing. So I think that was the biggest step for me, was doing the hymn playing. And of course, like I said, when I first started hymn playing, it was very hard to find 4-part hymns. I had to take the book from the church, go to the store to copy and return the book to the church. And it had to be within a time frame. So I didn't have a day. Sometimes it was a few hours. And then I would work on the parts. I would also clearly mark lifting of parts. My teacher taught me how to do that. And I think that helped too with coordination, because you also listen differently when you're repeating notes. And it changes the way you play. I also remember my first hymn was Lobe den Herrn, a very famous one. And I also remember, which is still my favorite hymn, Lobe den Herrn, Praise to Lord the Almighty. And then the other one was Wir pflügen und wir streuen. Unfortunately, I don't remember in English. But we plow the fields and scatter. There we go. It took me a while. But the nice thing about that, I was really challenged with that one. And that's how coordination, I think that was a key turning point for me, because there's dotted rhythms in that refrain. And the dotted rhythms really set me off at first. really frustrated me because most hymns move fairly standard, like rhythmically. We're talking normal hymns, and they do. But this one had those dotted rhythms, and that really forced me to test and it challenged my coordination because I couldn't think about the other issues. I had to have those clarified and set. So I think hymn playing definitely helps with coordination. And the other thing that some of my teachers taught me over the years later was just to register hymn playing, I'm going to say on the fly, but making the changes as you hear it. And that's how I've been playing hymns for years. And it's just amazing playing that way because what you hear is what you're interpreting in the moment, even though I practice them in advance. And so that's made me more relaxed with coordination.
Beautiful ideas, Robert, because a lot of times organists tend to neglect hymn playing, especially those who want to play real, so to say, organ music, right? Preludes, fugues, toccatas, chorale preludes. But hymns are what? Just chords, progression of chords. How they are interesting. They should be boring, right? But no, if you treat them as real organ compositions, right? They really help you advance further, step by step, because it's very controlled environment, right? As you say, everything moves quite straightforwardly. A little bit of syncopations here and there, but not too much. So you could really overcome hand and feet coordination problem and fingering too a little bit because position, right?
Because things are more close. They're more close together, particularly in the left hand. You don't have many leaps. Of course, there are always exceptions with hymns, but we're talking just standard general hymns, and so it can really be good for the left hand. I know that helped me because left hand was challenging for me at first with repertoire because I'm more right-handed, but now that's not so much of an issue. So.
Did you use a lot of pedals in hymn playing?
I would say yes. And I think, again, I'm thankful for having been thrown into just like I was thrown into it and I just had to play. And it sounds scary in a way it is, but in a way it's also a blessing because you don't worry. Because you're in the moment. It's like I said earlier, if you hit a wrong note, it's not really a wrong note because the congregation doesn't have the 4-part setting. So you're making it up. Now, thankfully, I had some great instruction books about harmony that really helped with that. And so I remember the Hindemith, but there was also one Harmonielehre, which I don't even know the author of. But just going through those exercises, you got used to the style, and it gave you a sort of a foundation. And then you could expand from that foundation. And I mean, that's part of how I also, this is a slight tangent, but also play hymns sort of in a jazz way because I had that understanding as well, just because that's how I came to classical music. In Germany, I kind of wasn't really interested in classical. I liked the organ, but I wasn't really excited about classical. And it was jazz that actually brought me to classical. So
I like Hindemith's harmony exercises so much. They're my favorite. They're so simple, so practical, with just a few rules, right? Just to start, and you are off to the races. Basically, they are not dry, not very theoretical, but very practical and doable for early beginners.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Robert, you mentioned your early teacher. Who else were a big part of your, influence on you? Maybe could you name a few more of your mentors over time?
Sure. I think one would be my undergrad instructor, Robert W. Morrison, and he just was. In many ways, just a blessing that I couldn't really see at the beginning, because he took lessons from Marcel Dupré and also from Virgil Fox. So I learned a lot of great material and instruction and technique from him. And Stephen Williams taught me a lot about interpretation. It's great to study in college, and I enjoyed it. I mean, it was amazing. But it's also important. It gets harder when you are out, and I'm a full-time church musician, so you have to choose to continue that, or you can choose to not continue that. There's this saying in church music that you can only do one. So if you put all your effort into organ music, then you can't really do so much for choir. I don't really agree with that. That's all I'm going to say. But I do think that there's some validity to it, because we only have so much time. So you have to decide if you're going to put time to organ repertoire and hymns. And of course, I decided to do that. But he really taught me how to enjoy the music after I had that backing with technique, and really to understand interpreting it, and to look at it as vocal music too, to think of it through other instruments. Of course, Morrison taught me a lot about the symphonic approach, which comes from the French as well. But I didn't have that full understanding or time. Maybe just time was lacking because you're learning so much. The time to really enjoy the music and consider its vocal nature sometimes. So he really challenged me with that. And one of the things I do want to say about Morrison was that he prepared me well for the church. I was practicing maybe 9 to 10 pieces at a time. Now that sounds crazy, but he had me at all different levels. So I would practice something very easy that I would have done in 1 hour that I play for next week. But what happened was, at the end of my study, I had 150 pieces for church services. So he prepared me for what I was to do. And I'm very thankful to him for that. And really passed on some great knowledge from some of the French masters as well.
Let me say something very interesting. You mentioned that he taught you pieces at various levels of difficulty. Now, that's an interesting idea, because a lot of times we tend to teach students, linearly, and start from the easier and more advanced until, Widor and French symphonies and Duruflé and other things. But if you integrate easier pieces in your week, then of course you prepare for church services much faster. And when you play recitals, you don't have to play, all difficult music all the time. You can enjoy a slow adagio or cantilena or siciliana, something like that. So I think this is a very valid approach too.
And I think I've taken that concept and I've furthered that in my teaching today with students, and I found it to be very valuable. It also gives you a chance to teach other composers too. Because you could spend, I'm sure we could all spend hours and years on the masters, and that could be all we do. And he did. I mean, I had to still work on major pieces as well. But it was encouraging to me in my practice as well, because if I was frustrated in the moment, I could go back to a piece that I may not have so much work on, and then I could go back to the piece that I really needed to continue with that challenge on. So that was great. He also allowed me to select some of the music I wanted to play, which I thought was great. Now, of course, I still had to play the standard repertoire. It wasn't that. And he also encouraged me to do the AGO examinations, which I thought was very helpful as well, because it does really test some of the basic service playing strategies, and it makes you confident. So then when you're going into service, now I already did do Leistungsnachweis in Germany, which is sort of like a service playing thing, which was a little different. So I already had some background on it, but I think all those ideas really helped shape me as an organist in the church today.
So, Robert, how does your normal week in church look like today?
I'm laughing because it's always different, Vidas. It depends on the day. Well, I do want to say this because it's important, and I mean this for all of us church musicians. We have to be intentional about practicing. So one thing I've learned over the years, and I've been doing this for like 25 plus years now, working in churches, is that do it first. So this is what I'm going to hopefully do after this podcast. When I go to church, I walk in and I practice first, because there's so much time that you have to spend with other things that if you wait for that, then it usually doesn't happen. Now, then there are some days that you can't, with church ministry, there's no way it's going to happen. But what I have done is 20 minutes is still valuable, just like 10 minutes. Even if you're just taking 10 to 15 minutes to run a section or two, that's very helpful. So, okay.
Close the window because the dog was barking.
Oh, okay. So I think that's important. The first thing, you want to practice first thing. And I also have made it a point with practicing to keep repertoire in for the worship services. So it takes some creativity at times because, for example, if you take Franck's second chorale, you can't play that as a prelude. It's too long. But you can split it up into 3 parts. Mm-hmm. And you could make it part of the worship service or prelude, postlude. So I really try to continue playing repertoire so that doesn't get lost. And that, again, it's an intentionality that you have to have. And then after that, it's more, a lot of time I spend in the week is connecting with people, particularly now. You have to track people's lives as volunteers. If I'm not connecting with them after every rehearsal, spending time with them, they tend to remove themselves, unfortunately. It's part of the changing culture, I think, in the church, at least where I am. And then, so a lot of times I'm making time for people. If that helps. I mean, we could talk about this for hours because every week is different in the church. I mean, one thing I do say is it never gets boring. I mean, you can't ever be bored with what's going on in a church music ministry. And it requires a certain flexibility, too, that you just have to. So that's why it's so important to practice and plan almost first, even the rehearsal planning, all of that. So then you have time for people.
I don't know if our listeners noticed the insight that you just said a moment ago about playing for church longer pieces, but dividing them into chunks of episodes like Franck's chorale into 3 sections. Mm-hmm. It's so valuable, right? It's a magnificent piece, but it's of course too long for liturgy. But if you really think about it, every piece has the beginning, middle, and end, right? So you could subdivide the 3 parts, and maybe sometimes add a cadence at the end of each part if it doesn't end, nicely. Maybe you need to go back to the home key or something, or add a little bit. But in Franck's case, sometimes it works just as it is, right?
Absolutely. It's really easy in that one. Some of them it takes a little more creativity, but it's something I've decided, and I think I've also learned that congregations, and this is the one congregations I've been blessed to be involved with. I can't say this for everyone, but they want to hear good music, and we shouldn't deprive them of that. But I also think we need to show provide a variety. So I'm not going to play that every week, but I'm going to balance it. And one of my personal rules, it's the German in me, is thinking I always play at least 1 work of Bach every month, a big work. It's just something that I do because I enjoy doing it, but also it keeps everything, the technique there. But I also make sure to play different styles as well. So I want to continue to play from the Romantic period. I want to play something based on a hymn tune. Yes, I have a background with jazz and the organ, so I play some jazz as well and contemporary music on the organ. I think there needs to be a balance, and I think the congregations want that. I've noticed that when I play the works of the masters, they like this summer I did, and it's a hobby of mine. This is a hobby, is that I play Bach's Toccata in the summer. So the very famous one, the D minor, right? Yeah, that one. So, and I do it because sounds a little weird, but it's not that I want to reward the congregation. But if they're making time to come out in the summer, it just seems to be more of a challenge today. Why not give them something to make them a little even happier? And it's amazing, the feedback from it. Oh, I love that piece. But it's just sometimes playing those pieces at times when they least expect it. Another thing I like to do, it's one of my hobbies as well, is the Vidor Toccata. I know everyone plays it on Easter, and I do it every 3 years on Easter, but I like playing it on Christ the King Sunday, because that's often around Thanksgiving in this country. And so some people are away, like, oh, well, you missed it. But it's the idea that all of the music has value and that each Sunday is equally important. And I really try to view it that way. And that can be challenging at times, but I really try to view it that way because, first of all, because it's a worship service, but second of all, everyone is important. So it doesn't matter if there's less people there or more people there. Why should I be bringing less just because some people are choosing not to come? So I've tried things like that, and it's been very well received by the congregations. And I do also get the sense they want to hear new repertoire. So, and they want to be challenged, but it's our responsibility as organists to do that. So I know some churches in the past, I had to play some of the French dissonance, which to me isn't dissonant anymore, but to them it is, to get that sound in their ears. So then after a while, oh, it's not that bad. But they just didn't realize, and it's not a bad sound, but it's perceived that way at first. So just really challenging. I mean, I've gone as far as playing John Cage, which there's some great works there. And again, people talking about it, Vidas. So we have to stay creative, I think, in the church, and that's important too.
Now, when you play John Cage in church, for example, do you communicate somehow about the piece, about the composer, about this idea of, I don't know, aleatoric music, avant-garde music? How do you communicate these ideas with people?
Well, I'm careful when I do something like that. So this past year, for example, during the season of Lent, the church was studying a book. This was the first time I did it, but it was sort of a devotional recital series. I had Wednesday night recitals based on sections from the book. So I had program notes to explain what was going on in the John Cage piece. Because you can't just sit down and play notes, repeat it, and hold them. But again, the response, I will tell you, was amazing. People were thinking about the organ, the way it was talking, the way it was responding. Oh, why are these sounds like that? It gave me a chance to educate people about the sounds of the organ, what it can actually do. They could certainly hear the difference between a reed and the flute, because in John Cage's score, the one I played, as slow as possible, I only played one movement, but you register freely. So you can register in the moment of however you hear it. So I only played one movement, but as part of that Lenten devotional recital series, I had program notes that explained what was going on.
I'm so glad you are always challenging not only your congregation but yourself too. It's a really brave act to play those risky compositions in front of people, right? And being.
I agree. I will tell you that I feel that way. And then I talked to my wife, and she says, "Oh, just go for it." So I need to give her credit because she encourages me to do that.
It does. Oh, good.
So she's an encourager in that. But I've also learned over the years, at least for me, that I don't want to, it's not even depriving people of it, but it's educating is the key. So if we educate what we're doing and why we're doing it, I think it will work. I've had this issue with jazz because some people in the church feel like it doesn't fit at all. And I really, and even for the organ, some people don't think it fits at all. And it's okay if you disagree with me, but I certainly think it fits. I mean, my thesis was on that. I've really been playing jazz for years on the organ, and it has a different way of speaking, but I also have to educate people about that so they understand, there's nothing wrong with this. Just like a lot of music that we would, unfortunately in the church, they judge, instead of really thinking, this music can really reach in so many different ways, and that doesn't mean we should just avoid it just because of that. And believe it or not, jazz has that sort of stigma that I've heard over the years. Oh, it's not appropriate to play in church and things like that. So I've really worked, this has sort of been like my mini mission of just getting churches hopefully to understand, like, we need to look at the full body of music, like all the styles, and try to give honor to each of them because they each have their value. And I think that's important. And that means going back as far as possible. I mean, if you have to go back to Maria Tsar, play it. That's me. I mean, and yeah, one week I want to do English voluntaries on manuals. The next week I'm playing John Cage. I know it's weird, but that's me. But I think what's great about that is the congregation is hearing such a wide variety of music, and it can reach in different ways. So,
what I admire about you, Robert, that you're constantly pushing the boundaries, right, of what's possible. You are expanding your horizons, and not necessarily in a very systematic way. You don't necessarily play, Maria Tsar, then Italians, then French, then Germans, then going through the centuries, right? It would be systematic but stiff method. It might work, but you're, spontaneous about it, right?
Well, I do plan it. I can't say that I don't plan it because I have to practice. But I think it probably does come off more spontaneous than it actually is. But to me, it's a joy because we have so much. And today with, the internet and IMSLP and all the other websites, that's the big one, obviously. We can get so much of this music. And it's not that hard. Like in the past, you had to look through. I remember in Germany, I could barely even look at the music. I had to actually pull it out and buy it. So you had to think about and now I think they occasionally let you look at it. So I need to tell the truth, but it's harder and harder to do. So we need to be aware of that, I think.
Do you like to compose music too?
I have done some of that. I think it's more time that gets in the way. I have 2 children, so that's part of it, and that's a priority for me. But I do think time, I tend to compose more for the choir out of need, very much like all the other composers did, because they have what they have, and it's best to compose for what you have. I have done some organ pieces. They tend to be more collaborative with other instruments. And I've done a lot of improvising, particularly on the piano, but I still transfer a lot of those ideas to the organ.
Good. You combine improvisation, composition, piano, organ, collaboration. It's very creative and rewarding experience, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. It's the improvising. It can be scary, but I still keep doing it. Because if I don't, it's not that I lose it. I feel almost like it's something that I need to share. because it's a different way of your soul speaking when you improvise. I know you understand this because you improvise, and I've heard your improvisations, and they've been really inspiring to me. So I know that you know what I mean, because you're sharing yourself differently when you improvise.
Yes.
Don't you agree?
Absolutely. On a good day, I start my day with improvisation. I even now have this keyboard synthesizer, which plugs into my computer, and I can improvise, and Sibelius notation will transform it with difficult and strange and crazy syncopations, of course. And then I have to clean it up. But improvisation too.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Sort of, you have to let ideas out, because otherwise it's sort of, you're not living fully, right? You are maybe living other composers, you're eating other people's music, right? Your ideas, but you're not transforming through your own mind, right? You're not letting them out into the world for people to judge or something. I think we have to be brave about that, at least at first, right? It's really scary at the beginning when you sit down on the bench and a bunch of people are looking at you, right? And you don't know what. It's very risky.
I could not agree more with you. My first time I really did like serious improv. Like I had to do it as part of degrees in the past. And I'll be honest with you, you can sort of memorize and get through that. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, because that has a value to it. But the first time I remember really doing it there was a Sunday many years ago, and I just felt, whatever you all think, I felt God was encouraging me to do this. So I went with it. Take the scripture verse of the day, and I want you to interpret it musically. And I tried it. And I was scared as ever because I had no idea what I was doing. And what I've noticed from my improvisations today, and I don't know if you do it this way, but I tend to have at least one idea to begin. And I have that one idea, and that's all I take. And after that, it's really, truly all improv. And I've also noticed that, of course, the cadences and all of that training that I had initially, that from the Collegaue book, and also some of the chords that I learned like around 8, because I did get my first keyboard when I was 8. I do remember that. That really has helped my improvisation today, because I can hear the circle of fifths, or I can hear that surprise chord, or you can hear that Neapolitan, so it's a little different. So it makes it a little easier, but it's no less scary. I'll tell you that.
I know, Robert. I also started with memorized improvisations, and even written out improvisations, maybe blueprints, maybe I tried to copy the style of other people, right, of the masters, maybe imitate the models of other compositions. And maybe, of course, integrate my harmony skills. All these things are very classical. But then somehow I started to switch into the free realm, not so much planned, but spontaneous, as we are now talking, right? We haven't rehearsed and memorized our speech, no? But we are communicating and sharing stories. So I have only one rule today, which is telling stories. And it has to be interesting. That's it. If it's interesting, it might work. And when I'm improvising, I have to be constantly aware, how does it sound in the room and in the time frame, if it's interesting for 30 seconds, it doesn't mean it will be interesting 3 minutes later,
That's right. Absolutely, yeah.
Changing things and building arcs and repetitions, recapitulation, thinking long term. It's really storytelling, but in musical terms too.
I would agree. And I think one of the other things that I've learned over the years is just using registration. The sounds of the organ a lot of times can win so much time. Instead of coming up with new ideas, just changing the color of the sound, what it can actually do in the moment. And it doesn't have to always be drastic. It can be very slight, but that's helpful.
Yeah. And always be sort of unpredictable. The more unpredictable you can be, the more people will pay attention to your playing, right?
I agree with that as well.
Wonderful, Robert. You are so creative, so brave. I'm so happy that we met. Keep creating, keep sharing, and keep challenging yourself and your congregation. And before we end, Robert, could you give our listeners a link where they could find you and your work online? Maybe your church's website. Maybe you have a website or something. Could you share?
Yes, sure. I have a website. It's www.rmorehead.com, and it's RMOREHEAD. So did I spell that right? I think so. RMOREHEAD, rmorehead.com. And that's, there's I do try some different things on there. I have Hymn of the Week, and I've been doing this every week. I take a hymn from the Evangelical Lutheran hymnal, I give a little background, and I play it. Most of the time it's on the organ. I would say probably 80 to 90%. The other 10% it's on the piano, but that anyone can subscribe to that on YouTube. I know the church has really appreciated listening to that before Sundays. I also have some other things on the web page, some organ stuff, and people are welcome to check that out.
Wonderful. You are sort of inviting people for a journey, right? To listen long-term those hymns of the week with you. And it's very, very educating, I think, too.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it depends on the week, but I will also do some text painting sometimes with the way I play the hymns. I explain that a bit. Sometimes I demonstrate it. So, I was encouraged by someone at the church at Emmanuel Lutheran to do this. It wasn't my idea, but I've grown through it, and it's been very rewarding, even for me just to do. So I've been keeping it every week, so I'm trying to keep
Robert,
it.
How can people find your church's website? Could you spell it out too?
Sure. That would be ELC Vienna. So it's ELC and then Vienna, VIENNA.org. So www.elcvienna.org. It's in Vienna, Virginia. So.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I'll make sure I will include your website and church's website into the description of the podcast conversation, and people will click and visit you and say hello, perhaps, and greet you and keep in touch with you and subscribe to your YouTube channel as well. So thank you so much, Robert. You are so brave and creative. Keep sharing ideas with the world. And the more value you create around you, the more value will come back to you.
Well, thank you for your encouragement. And I do want to thank you just very briefly, because I did go through your entire sight reading Bach program.
Amazing.
That was quite a challenge towards the end, because it was the art of the fugue, and I remember doing it. But I want to encourage you as well to continue what you're doing, because it's not very easy after you graduate from school to always find a teacher, particularly when you have a family and you have a church job and the income can be challenging, to provide ways to teach and for students to learn when they can't afford a teacher. And I've been thankful to have teachers that have worked with me on that. And I thank you for what you're doing too. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. When I created organ sight reading master course, it lasts about 9 months, right? And,
yes, it took me longer.
It was so crazy because all the gurus out there, right, who taught me things how to teach online said, the best thing you could do is 3 months, maybe 12 weeks, right? People will get bored after that. But now 9 months, it's crazy. But I think the course is very systematic, and I didn't want to break it up into parts. I wanted to go over the art of fugue entire cycle, you know. And not too many people manage to stick with it, but those who do.
It's hard to stick with. We'll be honest with you. But it really did help. I mean, I turned to Bach, and it was easier after I did it. And I do remember you sending the bonus. It was it Brahms or Reger? I think it was Reger.
Reger, yeah.
Right, the 30. I already knew them, but it still, I thought it was very much worth my time. And I certainly did not have the income at that point to pay for a teacher. So it really did help for me to keep, because I want to keep strong, and I do want to keep learning. So it was very helpful.
So I hope, Robert, you will keep teaching other people now that you know so much about organ playing. Now you can share your own experiences and even take them even further, right?
Yes, amen. So be it. Absolutely.
Thanks so much. Have a great practice today.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
If you liked this conversation, I encourage you to visit my blog Secrets of Organ Playing at organduo.lt, where you will find lots of insights, practical advice, and training for every area of organ playing. You can subscribe to this blog for free to get your daily dose of inspiration and to be the first to know when any of my future podcasts roll out. I hope to help you reach your dreams in organ playing. I'm Vidas Pinkevičius. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you online really soon.